Do you feel the pull between being an entrepreneur and a pastor? What if you're meant to be an EntrePastor? In today's episode, special guests Les Hughes and Jon Sanders share their EntrePastor's journey and how they help pastors think, act, and thrive like prosperous entrepreneurs. Let's get started. Hey, what's up? Welcome to the More Than a Pastor show. My name is Rich Avery, your host. This is where we help you turn your ministry know-how into sustainable income outside the church through a business or side hustle that's right for you, so you can serve God and provide for your family no matter what. Hey, if you're not already a part of our private Facebook community, I'd love for you to join today. You can find the link to the Facebook group over at our website, morethanapastor.com/19 for episode 19. In the Facebook group, I share content each week that's only available there. You won't find it in other places. There's also opportunities for you to discuss each episode, share your feedback, or share what you're working on and get encouragement and support from myself and other members in the group. Again, I'd love for you to join that private More Than a Pastor community on Facebook. You'll find the link for it in the show notes at morethanapastor.com/19 for episode 19. If you're feeling the pull between being an entrepreneur and a pastor, you're going to love today's show because, as I've said before, you don't have to choose one over the other. Today, I'm excited to share an interview with Jon Sanders and Les Hughes. They're fellow pastors I met through Dan Miller's 48 Days Eagles community. You've heard me share before the impact that Dan Miller has made in my life, and that 48 Days Eagles community has really helped me to learn and grow in life and business in some great ways. So I was blessed to meet Jon and Les through that community. If you'd like to learn more about it, you can find the link for it in the show notes at morethanapastor.com/19 for episode 19. But Jon and Les, they're building a platform called EntrePastors. They'll describe more about what that is in just a minute. So before I say anything more, let's just dive into the interview. Well, hey, welcome to More Than a Pastor, and this is Rich Avery, and I'm glad to have some special guests for my very first interview, and it's only fitting, I guess, for me to begin interviewing guests on the show to have these two guys being on the show today. And we have Les Hughes and Jon Sanders from the EntrePastors community. So Les and Jon, glad to have you guys on the show today.
Thanks, Rich. We're glad to be here.
Thank you, man.
Awesome. Hey, you bet. It's really good. I was blessed. For those who are listening, they just interviewed me on their podcast. And then I said, well, if I can be interviewed by you guys, how about I interview you as well? And so we're glad to have these guys on the show as well. I had the privilege of meeting you both last October in Florida for a wonderful event called EntrePastors. It was your very first event that you guys had hosted. And so some people maybe aren't familiar yet with the EntrePastors brand or community. Maybe you can take a moment and let us know what that's about.
Yeah, well, we're in a very similar space to you, Rich, with your More Than a Pastor platform. We basically are combining the word entrepreneur with pastor. We think it's a good thing when pastors are out in the marketplace doing something in terms of an entrepreneurial business of their own. Again, we're not mad if they're bivocational and work for someone else. We just see a lot of time freedom and some other benefits of being your own boss and being in that entrepreneurial space. And so that's what we do. We help pastors achieve financial freedom as they show up in the world as prosperous entrepreneurs. We think it's a good thing for them, for their families, and for the churches that they lead. So that's really at the heart of our message and how we serve pastors.
Well, when I was at the event last October, it just resonated so well. And I was blessed to meet you guys and hear you share your stories, and then meet so many other pastors who are entrepreneurs who are creating income outside their church. I was really inspired. I'd love to find out first, how did you guys get connected? I mean, I know, Jon, I knew you a little bit through Dan Miller's 48 Days Eagles community, but how did you two get together, and how did this message resonate with you both that you wanted to join in on the effort together?
Yeah, well, you're exactly right. It was through our friendship and relationship with Dan Miller, who's mentor and business coach to both of us at the time. I had been in the mastermind group for a little bit, but I was the only pastor at the time. There were several people in there that had ministry backgrounds, and they certainly kingdom-minded people. But at the time, I was the only one that was serving as a vocational pastor. And so, when this guy named John Sanders joined, who was a pastor and also a first responder as a firefighter, I was and had a platform that he had established and really worked hard to get going already. I was interested in, getting to know him, but to his credit, he really did it right. So he reached out, I think probably to a few of us just to get to know us some. And it didn't take long to figure out that he and I had a similar passion and love for not only ministry, but also the marketplace. And so we had some conversations and talked about what if, and then we went out there and got a domain name and then planned the conference and started a podcast, and man, it just kind of rolled from there.
Yeah, we kind of caught a tiger by the tail with this thing. I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase "building the plane while you fly it," but that's pretty much what we're doing. I said we did almost like it's in the past, but that's what we are currently still doing. We're building this thing as we're flying it, and yeah, it's just we met someone with a common passion, common interest, and saw an opportunity and said, let's go, let's start building this thing. And so we've been doing this now for not even a full year yet, but it's been awesome to see what God has done in that short period of time.
Yeah. And in some ways it has really flown by. Like, Rich, I can't believe it's been almost a year since we had that steak on the beach and looked at this, watched the sunset and dreamed about our businesses. And I'll also say this, man, for anybody that wants to see a model of how to really hold yourself accountable and take some action, man, you did that. You made the trip, you made an investment in yourself, and then you got involved and you met people, you reached out to people. I think even now you've got some friendships and relationships that came as a result of you getting out of your comfort zone, and I really commend you for that.
Can I piggyback on that, Rich? Can we just hijack your show for a minute? I'm telling you, I want your audience to hear this. I want to just say exclamation point to what Les just said, because if you lined up, 10 pastors, I promise 9 of them would have talked themselves out of making the investment that you made, Rich, to invest in yourself, to fly down to Florida. I know that was a miserable place to meet on the beach and all this stuff, but seriously, the expenses involved in traveling, in paying for the event that we put on, but then to experience the relationships and the clarity and the motivation coming out of it. So attaboy to you, and to those listening, the other 9, man, get in the game. So there you go.
Well, it's biblical, huh?
There you go.
The 9 that walked away and the 1 that came back. There you go. Yeah. Well, that was the most expensive steak I ever had. And, but
us too.
When I heard you guys, when I heard about the event, the EntrePastors event, the inaugural event last fall, I just knew I had to be there, and it just really resonated with me so much. And as you guys have begun this ministry / business, pursuing your calling in this way, it was the similar calling that I have felt of late as well. And so I just felt like, man, I've got to be there, be with these guys, meet these guys in person. And then you had Dan Miller there, and Vincent Pugliese. He's one I've been able to get to know here recently and stay connected with, and John Stange, some other great guys. And Dan, my wife and I have been connected with him. We got to go on a cruise with Dan and Joanne in 2019. So before the world shut down, thankfully, in 2019, I had a sabbatical from my church, and we were able to cruise with Dan and Joanne and maybe 18 other people, and had a great time. So to be down there to renew that connection and to be with you guys was just really great. And so when do you have plans for the next EntrePastors event, or what's this next season look like for you guys in terms of events?
At the moment, we don't have another live or virtual event on the calendar. What we are really focusing on right now is revamping our offer that surrounds our membership community. And what we're really getting ready to roll out is what we're calling a pastor's roadmap to financial freedom. And so it's really just taking, as I said, we built the plane. As we're flying it, we kind of just got a membership community up and off the ground. We've been the last few months coming back, looking at that, going, okay, how do we take this now to the next level and really build in some success path points along the way where we can help people take measurable steps of action and success down that EntrePastor journey. So we're probably, at the time of this recording, Rich, we're probably just weeks away from rolling that out. So that's really been taking a lot of our time and focus right now.
Oh,
that's
cool.
what got me shot down earlier. John mentioned that to you, but I had the gall to mention a possible event, and our integrator nipped that in the bud like real quick. So I won't be bringing that up anytime soon.
Oh man. All right. Well, that the success pathway is important, and I've been trying to think of that as well. Maybe I'll just copy yours instead. But
absolutely
no. But as we think about, well, and so my next question, I'll kind of segue with that. Like there's a pathway that pastors can take as they maybe are starting to feel like, okay, maybe God is calling me to something more in my life. As great as ministry is and as fulfilling as it is in ministry, maybe I'm feeling this call to entrepreneurship as well. And so for you guys to create that pathway to help them to take the steps and how to discern that. So let me just ask you first, for each of you, take me to that moment when you felt like, I think I'm called to be more than a pastor. Like, as great as ministry is, there's something else that God's calling me to in addition to that. What was that like for you guys? Was that a worry? Was it a struggle? Did you fight that? Just take us to that moment when you first began to feel that. What was that like for you?
Yeah, I'll try and share my story briefly, but I came from a very traditional church background. My dad was a pastor, full-time and single source of income. That's what I saw growing up. And when I launched and planted a church years ago, that was the model that I aspired to. Like, initially we were on outside financial support, but my goal was just as quickly as possible to get all that other income out of my life and get back to one source of income coming from the church. And I was able to accomplish that goal and be in that place of just a single source of income coming from one, full-time job at a church. But Rich, one part of your story that I share is all along, ever since I can remember, I've always been drawn to those success stories in business and the idea of different startups and products. Like, I love those stories. I've always, listened to the podcasts and read the magazine articles. Like, I like that stuff. And yet I never saw that as being an option or a possibility for me. Where my kind of journey started to change was I came into pastoral ministry out of a world of firefighting. I was a career firefighter and really sensed God calling me to ministry. And again, this mindset was, can't do both. You got to pick one. So obviously God's calling me to quit the fire service, which I did, got into pastoring. And it wasn't until many years later, I had an opportunity that I clearly sensed was from God, where he was offering it back to me saying, John, if you want to be a full-time firefighter and lead a church, I've never had a problem with it from the beginning. Here it is. And so I had an opportunity to go back into full-time firefighting. So now here I am, full-time pastor, full-time firefighter, 2 full-time jobs. That's when the church started to fall on some really hard financial times. And I'm grateful that God had, lined up another source of income for me and my family. And at that point, it didn't take long for me to get to the place of just being sick and tired of what I've come to call the narrative of the starving pastor, where it's like my income was tanking. We were making huge adjustments on the church side of things, and no one was really that concerned about it, Rich. Like, people didn't seem to have this huge urgency about them that our pastor's income has nearly been cut in half. Wow. And I'm just like, I think I'm done with this narrative of a pastor that's just barely getting by financially. And that's when I hired a coach. That's when I started to see how I could repackage some of what I had already been doing for years in pastoral ministry through coaching, speaking, podcasting, and actually create another business around that. And so that was kind of my moment or I guess journey into a business of my own in addition to pastoring.
Thanks for sharing that.
For me, it started, I didn't even realize how early it started, Rich. My dad had an entrepreneurial spirit about him. I remember walking through our house one day and seeing a copy of Entrepreneur magazine on our coffee table. And I had never heard that word before. And I asked him what it was. And I'm sure he did the best he could to explain it. But to me, it still didn't make any sense. So rather than being taught that, I kind of caught it from watching him. And he always had something. He was buying this and selling that. We had a consignment shop at one point. He was just always doing something, always had his hand in something. And I'm sure that the extra income was nice. I just think that he was creative and wanted to be productive, and it was fun for him, in addition to being a bivocational pastor too. He was a pastor of a small rural church in Kentucky, and at the same time he was in the educational system in the state as well. And then even kind of later in life, he actually became a full-time vocational pastor, but he never stopped doing those other things, even when he didn't necessarily have to. And then for me personally, I began to see what the possibilities were, but it was in the form of a writing ministry. So doors opened up, make a long story short, doors opened up for me to take a message that was inside of me, that when I talked about it or preached or taught about it, I would have more people than usual say things that weren't just being nice. It was like, man, that's where I am right now. And I'd like to hear more about that, things like that. So I did a proposal, showed it to a traditional publisher at the time, and was able to publish that book. And that really opened my eyes to how broader a ministry could be, a teaching and preaching ministry, to get a message out outside the context of the local, that local church. A few years later, I was serving in another city, multi-site church, in a highly populated area, and had a much larger footprint and a larger platform and more influence. And so by that time, blogging was starting to be a thing. Podcasting was gaining momentum. And so I got into that world as well and started seeing some momentum. And then, not even related to that at all, on the church side, there were some real pushbacks and battles in terms of vision, different visions and leadership. As lead pastor, there were visions that weren't consistent with where I felt like God wanted us to go as a church family, that really created some friction. And then there were just straight up, there was especially there were a few power people that dealt with money and used money as leverage in their worlds. And they brought that into the church environment, and it was ugly. And I knew right away that that's not where I wanted to live. Now, I don't mean geographically. I mean, that space, that world is not where I wanted to live. Yeah. And so I just began to really pray that God would open up some other doors, because it's not a good feeling. I have strong convictions about the things that I have convictions about. And one of those is vision. And it's a terrible feeling to believe that God has called you to do something or to lead in a certain way and not be able to do it, or have my hands cuffed because of a lack of resources, or because my family's livelihood was being threatened. And when push comes to shove, I want to always, and I hope I will always, choose following, the mandate that I believe is coming from the Lord. And what I understood was that the more I cannot depend upon that one stream of income, the more freedom that really gives me to be obedient to the Lord. And so that got me looking and really being open to what if. So, but even before that, Rich, even if it hadn't been for that, I was like you. I had you mentioned to us a story about somebody that really poured into your life, that came alongside of you, kind of showed you the ropes in terms of real estate. And I had a close friend of mine, before all that happened, I had a close friend that we'd gotten involved in purchasing some houses and fixing them up and flipping them, and also renting some others. So I'd had a taste of that of that world as well. And I liked it. It was fun. And besides that, it just opens up a whole different world of people that you can interact with that probably or may not ever come to your church or pick up your, Christian living book and read it, which is what I was writing. So that's just a little bit about my journey. And from there, it's just been a matter of, looking up and seeing people like John or someone else that was taking the same journey I was.
Wow, it's powerful. Thank you both for sharing your stories in that way. It's interesting. You both kind of touched on the idea of freedom, wanting the freedom to be able to serve God and provide for your family no matter what happens. And you both had stories about where there were some issues in the church where things came up, and because you had that stream of income outside the church, you're able to navigate and pivot and still serve God and not have to worry about feeding your family and things like that. What would you say to other pastors that maybe are wondering that themselves? Like, is it okay to think about having freedom? Is it okay to think about having more for our family? A lot of times we hear about the starving pastor, or churches that want to, pay their pastor just enough to keep him humble and not be able to, be too much in the world. And I don't know. I know a lot of more churches are better at paying pastors a living wage and a competitive wage, but in a lot of places they can't or they don't. So what would you say to a pastor that maybe feels like they're called to something more, they want to do something different, and maybe entrepreneurship, but they're not sure? How would you guide them? What should their first step be?
Well, I think so much of the holdup is a mindset issue rather than logistics. I mean, it's probably 90% mental game, and the other 10% is just taking some deliberate steps of action forward. And I don't want to minimize it and make it sound like it's easy to just go start a business. But the biggest thing I think that holds us back as pastors is many different narratives or thoughts that are running in the back of our minds, starting with permission. I'll just use that word, like feeling as though, is it even okay for me to do this? Do I have, is God okay with this? If I'm thriving financially, is my church okay with this? How do I feel about thriving financially? There's probably some underlying issues in many pastors, like some real negative narratives around money. And so just getting that permission to thrive financially and prosper, like to recognize this is not something that God is upset with you about. If you have a little bit more than just paycheck to paycheck and cringing every time you swipe your debit card at the grocery checkout aisle, like maybe God's not prescribing that. Maybe it's okay to have more. So that idea of permission. Another mindset thing I think pops up for a lot of pastors is this thought of, I'm just a pastor. I've, for the last 10, 15, 20 years, all I've done is I've just been a pastor. Nothing could be further from the truth when they interpret that to somehow mean I have no value out in the marketplace. I have no marketable skill that the marketplace would reward. That's one of the things we do, Rich, at EntrePastors, is we help pastors understand, you've got all kinds of different abilities that are used in pastoral ministry that can be rewarded very well out in the marketplace. And we can go in a long list of what those examples are. But yeah, just a lot of mindset stuff to know that you have permission, to know that you have something to offer. And now, let's decide on a course of action and take that step. I mean, that in a nutshell, that's kind of the very simplified version of it, but let's help you get going and get started in it.
Yeah. And Rich, this is going to sound a little cruel, so I'll go ahead and prepare your listeners ahead of time, but it's still true. And that is, it could be that if creating more of an entrepreneurial life, experimenting some in the marketplace and doing some of the things we talked about, if that's really a heart's desire for you, and if you want to get out there and go for it, whether it's taking a leap of faith or just easing down the runway, a long runway, whatever that looks like, it could be that you've got to almost fire some people out of your lives, because we know people. The reason we know it's a mindset thing, Rich, is that we know some people who struggle with thinking about these thoughts, even though they think about it, but we know some others who don't at all.
Mhm.
Like it's not, and they're being very successful in both worlds. It's possible. And,
Yeah.
and even to bring up, hey, well, what about people that have a problem with this kind of thing? We actually have people in our community that look at us like a calf looking at a new gate. Like, what are you talking about? This is awesome. Who would not want this? You know,
Yeah.
who would want to be critical about that? That's why we know it's a mindset thing. So
Mm.
it could be, you want to love everybody. We certainly want to love everybody, be somewhat accessible to the people we need accessible to, but you can choose whose voices you listen to, you know?
Yeah, one
And
thing I'll add real quick,
Yeah.
Rich, is it just kind of ties back in, is this idea that if you have an unhealthy pastor, it's going to be very difficult to have a healthy church. You know, unhealthy pastors generally don't produce healthy churches. And so if we're not taking care of ourselves, and again, it's not all about the money. It's not just that, but you think about how many areas of our life that financial stress touches when we're not making ends meet, or we're just barely getting by. And there's fear of, man, is the church going to be able to pay me this week? Is the offering what it needs to be? And you step back and look at kind of the macro picture of what's going on in our culture and in the church today. And it's like, if there's ever been a time in our Western culture, at least in our lifetime, for pastors to maybe look at the model and say it may not be like it's always been there for us, that time is now, I believe. And so we just want pastors to do well. We're not necessarily prescribing pastors to be making squillions of dollars and flying around the world in private jets and living in mansions. Maybe a few
Oh,
in our
man.
community are doing that, and
Come
that's
on.
great. Praise
You
God.
just shattered Les's dream
Dang.
there.
Well, Les can. That's fine if Les wants to. But no, you know what I'm saying? Like we just want pastors to do better, and because we think that when they get healthy, it's going to have a healthy impact on the churches that they lead.
Wow. Les, are you related to Howard Hughes at all? I mean, maybe you have a
Man, wouldn't that be
billionaire
awesome?
blood in your line there. So
No, man.
well, where in your ministry, so as you've been pursuing entrepreneurship in various ways, how have you found that to benefit your ministry, like personally as a pastor? I believe that there are ways that as we pursue creative pursuits outside the church, that feeds back to us. But what has it been for each of you personally, and how it's benefited you or changed your life and your ministry?
I'll give just one quick example. There's probably a lot of things I could say, but for me, one thing, it has forced me to live my life more intentionally. And that's a good thing, because there was a long season where as a pastor, I'm just living in reaction mode, passively, meeting each day and just seeing what needs come up and who needs their pastor today. Well, when you are going to work in both worlds, when you're going to have a foot in the marketplace and in the ministry, church ministry setting, you don't have the luxury of just meeting each day passively and letting whoever fill up your calendar and take it. You have to live intentionally. You have to take much better control of your calendar and your schedule, and set your priorities. And that not only has caused me to be healthier, it makes my ministry more impactful, because this might be harsh for some pastors to hear, maybe a little counterintuitive, but pastor, you're not necessarily serving your church well by just being available to every person who stops by your office and wants your time. Like, as in many cases, you're probably being taken off mission and really not being effective in your ministry. And so it's one of the things that we see often with pastors that are in both worlds, is that they are forced to be better equippers in the church and hand off ministry in a more healthy way to develop leaders, versus the full-time employee that he's the one hired hand that the church pays to do everything and just be there to put out all the fires. So for me, it's really kind of forced the issue in my life to live more intentionally in both arenas, both church world and business world.
That's
awesome.
great. Before I went into vocational ministry, Rich, I was in the retail grocery business. I was a store manager, and I knew what it was like to have to show results, and answer to a supervisor and an owner, and deal with profit loss and manage schedules and deal with upset customers, or getting a team on the same page. The things that our people who are employees or employers which is most of our church members deal with all the time. But, after over 20 years in full-time vocational ministry, if I were just to be honest, I had forgotten what a lot of that was like. So now being more back in the marketplace, I've been reminded what most of our people go through and every week, and the pressure that they're under, and the demands that are made of them. And the truth is that some of us in ministry, it's easier to coast and to hide in many ways, but you can't hide in many places in the marketplace. And those people want results, and they're serious about it. And so being back and more in the marketplace has just reminded me and helped me be more empathetic to what my church folks go through all the time.
Good. That's such a great point. And I think about, we think about like an ivory tower of the educational system, that professors, are up there somewhere and they don't understand what it's like for the regular people. I think there's something similar for some pastors to not know what's happening in the community. One of my side hustles for a couple of years has been to drive with Uber. And I have said that every pastor ought to drive with Uber if it's available in their community, because man, you go places you wouldn't normally go, and you encounter people and you hear stories that you wouldn't ever hear in your church. And you get your fingers on the pulse of what's happening and what real people are dealing with. And that just gave me some opportunities to minister, to pray with people. It was always weird after someone dropped an F-bomb in the car, and was talking about crazy things that happened this weekend. Then they asked me, hey, so is this your only gig, or what do you do? And then if I say like I'm a pastor, then it's like I just pass gas in the car, just suck the air out of the room,
Yes.
So I try to, if it was that way, I would try to soften that a little bit. But the Lord gave me so many cool opportunities I wouldn't have had otherwise. And
Rich, that's go ahead, Les.
I had a CEO one time. I was talking with him about a venture, and he was a Christ follower and involved in local church and new pastors. But I was trying to, this venture, I was wanting to get more pastors. That's my tribe, that was my influence. And he said something without really meaning it to be demeaning or derogatory. It just came out. He said, pastors got their own thing going on. And that kind of, it hit me. I thought, well, hang on now, but you know what? He was right, because we do have our own thing going on. We have a passion about the vision that we have for that particular ministry or context. But if you're not careful, man, you can really have tunnel vision to where it's almost like nothing else matters. And it certainly does.
One of the things I've said over the years, Rich, is that like in many cases, church gets in the way of ministry. And like we've built so much around this model of pastoring and what it looks like, that it keeps us from being out where the people are. Like newsflash, most of the community's not coming through the doors of our church, even on a Sunday morning, let alone through the week to rub shoulders with you, pastor. So if you stay locked up in those ivory towers, I know it's comfortable studying and reading in there, but one of the themes we hear so often in our community from other pastors that are in the marketplace as business owners is that, man, they have ministry opportunities, just like you said, like way more ministry opportunities than ever walk through the door of their church. And so I just think that's a really good thing to get our pastors out in the community, not to mention what Les is saying, just being connected to kind of the real world again and recognizing like this is the world in which we live. Not everyone lives in this little pastoral bubble that some of us get to live in. So yeah, we see a ton of benefit in having pastors out in the marketplace.
That's awesome. What do you feel, John and Les? I think maybe I've heard you both say that you feel like the church model, I hope I'm not putting words in your mouth, the church model is broken, or how we've done church is broken, or how it's funded. Maybe talk about that. What are you seeing in the church today, and why pastors should think about being entrepreneurs, of putting their skills to work in the marketplace? And what do you see as the future? Where are we going in the church, and with what a pastor looks like in the what are we in the 21st century? So
yeah,
are we in the 21st century?
I think one of those. I'll tell you this, Rich. I want to be careful, because I don't want to paint the picture that if you're a pastor that is in full-time vocational ministry and getting a full paycheck from a church, that you're somehow doing anything wrong. That's not at all my heart or where I'm coming from. I've been there, done that. grew up in it, saw my dad do it. But one of the things that I've come to realize that might be flawed about that model, or maybe some of the unintended consequences of creating this idea of a full-time professional pastor, it's made it very convenient for the body of Christ to sit back and say to the pastor, hey, we're going to put these expectations on you, pastor, because you are our employee. We hired you. You do the work of the ministry. We'll show up on Sunday to watch you do it. And then we'll come back next week and watch you do it again. And when I've read the New Testament a few times, I've never seen that model in there. As a matter of fact, I've seen the exact opposite that says in Ephesians 4 that God gave leaders to the church to equip the saints for works of service, meaning the real work of ministry is supposed to be getting accomplished by a body of all kinds of different parts that come together to do this one visionary work of Jesus in this world. And I never in the New Testament get the picture that one really tired pastor who's neglecting his family is the guy that's supposed to do all that, while everyone else sits back and watches. So that's just one thing. I'm sure we could come. I'll let Les speak to maybe where he sees things going in the future. But yeah, I see that as being a kind of an unintended consequence of this model of a full-time professional pastor.
Yeah, and there's several different layers to it because there are already so many different manifestations of what a local church looks like. But the model that is hurting and without any really foreseeable relief is pretty much a traditional church. So let me give you a textbook, and we're seeing this. I'm in the southeastern part of the United States, and we're seeing this all over the place, where a church might not have been busting at the seams, let's just say prior to COVID, but membership kind of trickling down from say the 70s and 80s, which there was just a massive movement that came off the backs of the 60s and kind of everything that was going on in the 60s. And there was a pendulum swing, and people came to the church and came to faith, and especially young people, teenagers, and there was movements across college campuses, and all that started to grow. And you had a lot of churches across, especially North America, that got up to that 300, 400 range, right in there, to where you can pay a full-time pastor a pretty good salary, maybe probably even a couple more staff members, and have a fully programmed ministry, and what that looked like, a fairly large footprint, or a campus to the facility. Well, now it was, and so it started to diminish. But what happens is, as you know, a crisis just is an accelerant on cultural trends that were going on anyway, which is what COVID and then the political situation, I think you can throw that in there as well, and our nation too. So all of that was an accelerant to get us more quickly to a place that it was sort of headed anyway. And now those churches that were about 300, 350, 400 are at 100 and 120. And they're trying to still upkeep facilities that's the same footprint, and they've got to have a minimal staff in order to continue to lead those ministries the way that it is. And so then it dwindles down to where when there's a turnover, you don't go out there, you're not able to go out there and get quite the status of person or education or experience or age as you were. And so you kind of come down, and then it goes from full-time to part-time. And then you cut the position out altogether. And then it goes from adding to any space to now you're just maintaining. And then things start leaking and air conditioner units go out. And then you start selling stuff or getting other people to lease parts of the building. That's what we're looking at. That's what we're looking at. And that's why we actually have people in our community, pastors in our community, that are figuring out some entrepreneurial ventures, not only for their personal lives, but also to continue to support the vision and the mission that they have in their communities, in their churches.
Wow. Yeah, I felt, and I think you guys have said it as well, it seems like God is wanting to do something like it's not the end of the church. Jesus is still in control. It's his church. It's his bride. He's still got his purpose for the church. But maybe Jesus wants to deinstitutionalize the church, maybe deprofessionalize it in some ways, and help it get back to a more missional movement that he intended it to be all along. And maybe it's going to be some pain, it's going to be some struggle to get there, but maybe it's going to be more healthier and more reflective of his heart in the future. So do you have any more thoughts on that?
Well, I don't claim to be a prophet, Rich, but what you just said resonates with my heart. Like, I think there's probably a lot of truth to that. And if I were a betting man, that's the direction I would bet that things are moving in. And so that's where I want pastors, instead of being in this reactionary mode of hanging on and fighting for an institution because what they're really fighting for is a paycheck and a way of life.
Yeah.
Man, let's position you well in the marketplace to where money's not a problem in your family. Like, you've got a really good income, you're doing work that you love to do, that you're passionate about, and out of that overflow, out of that abundance, let's see what that looks like to lead the church, because that calling to be a leader in the church is not going away. That calling to share the gospel with people and disciple others, like, that's not leaving you, pastor.
Yep.
So, you can still lead the church, and I'm good if it still meets in a building with steeples and stained glass. I mean, I don't care about that, but the model's probably going to be threatened from what we've always known. And I don't think that Jesus is freaking out about this right now. We might be, but it's in very good hands. And I think that some things are happening probably ultimately for the better. So if we can help pastors be prepared for that, and like, I think they'll lead us into that. I think a pastor that's prepared financially for this will lead the church instead of reactively holding back and trying to fight to protect what was, and making, the desired future of the church look a lot like our past, because we're not going back there, I don't think.
100%. And we're already seeing it happen. Think about it. There are organizations, and including the church, including some local churches, that just look at life differently. And I think a poster child for this is the Chick-fil-A organization. I mean, they saw an opportunity when COVID happened and nobody was allowed to go inside.
Yeah.
You talk about some people would have said they had the perfect business model, and if it's not broke, don't fix it. Man, their leadership got out in front of that thing. Now they have tents that you drive through. All the employees are outside taking the orders. I drove through a one of them the other day. I stay away from one usually around my house, because you can hardly get in line. For the thing. But I just had a craving, man. So I went through there, and they got me through there pretty quickly, the way that they always do. And I just sat there and looked around at what was going on, and the joy with the employees, and the buzz, and people were satisfied because they were having a pretty good experience. And here's the thing, they said to themselves, what does this make possible?
Wow.
And went after it. And so the churches that have that as a part of their mindset, what does this make possible? They've already shifted, and they're just continuing to do what they do in a different way. But people that cling, man, if they cling, I just don't see that that's going to probably turn out very well for them.
Wow. That's a powerful illustration right there. That's a great point. Yeah. What does this make possible? I think everyone can wrestle with that in anything going on in our lives, whether good or whether it's bad, or, how we perceive it. Like, it may be anything that can happen. It could be perceived as good, it could be perceived as bad, because we don't fully know how it will play out. But what is it, regardless, what does it make possible? How can we adapt? How can we change? How can we grow through that? Well, I know you guys have created the EntrePastors membership and community. You want to help pastors make these pivots and changes, and why don't you kind of walk us through what your goal is with the community, how people can find you and join. When I went to your first EntrePastors event last fall, I joined the community. I wanted to keep going with that. I wanted to keep that connection going with you guys and with other people in the membership. So just tell us how, if there's a pastor there that's maybe wrestling with, I'm not sure what to do, but it sounds like I need to be a part of this group. How would that benefit them? How can they get involved? And what are some of the things you guys are planning in this next season here with EntrePastors?
Yeah, well, thanks for that, Rich. If you go to EntrePastors.com, that's our website. That's where you can find us and connect with all of the different things we have to offer. But we do a podcast every week for free. So anybody that wants to tune into the podcast can hear that, hear us share stories of other pastors that are thriving, some that are very expertly doing it, and some that are just getting started. We kind of share all the stories, everything in between. So we have the podcast. As you mentioned, we have the membership community that we're in the process of really revamping right now. And we're going to be helping pastors discover their roadmap specifically built for them. How can we help you get to a place of financial freedom from where you are today to where you desire to be? So that's part of our membership community. And inside of that, there's content, there's some courses available. There's community that's available through that. And then we have our mastermind as well. That's really for a pastor that says, I want to do this at a deeper level. I really want to get connected to a network of high achieving pastors around the nation that are doing this together. And so we've got several different levels there available where we can work with people and serve our audience no matter where they are on their journey.
That's awesome. Well, I really am glad to be a part of that community and to see the content you guys have created. For me personally, I want to create more of a platform, more of an online platform, speaking, coaching, writing, that kind of thing. But there's more than that. And you guys have had to know Jody Pastori talk about how to create a service business and how to do whether it's like washing cars or janitorial services, or maybe like with Ryan Rieger, people talking about how to do stuff online, like through Amazon or those sorts of things. So you guys cover all the different angles. And I really appreciate that, because there's any different number of ways that a pastor can create extra income, putting their ministry skills to work. And so you guys are creating all those different pathways and helping them to figure that out. So I really appreciate that. And any other final famous last words you'd like to share before we go? I really appreciate your time today.
Well, we're thankful for you, Rich, letting us come on, and especially for being a part of our community. You add value to that. And we do appreciate so much you just jumping in there with both feet and rolling up your sleeves and getting started, man. And it's really rewarding to see not only that you've taken action, but that that's producing some results, man, and some fruit in your life and in the lives of others. So we help in all those ways that you mentioned. We're also adding to that content, to that success path all the time. We will roll out more for people who want to experiment more or do more in the real estate side of it as well, as well as some others. We now have EntrePastor Press for pastors that may have a hard time getting through those gatekeepers in the publishing world. It's not very easy, but we can sit down and have a conversation and show them how to go about publishing their work as well. So we're adding stuff all the time.
That's awesome.
Yeah, my big word of encouragement to any pastor listening to this is, man, just get started. We do have a free get started guide if anyone's interested. If there's any of your listeners, Rich, that are like, this all sounds exciting, I have just no idea where I would even begin. If you go to EntrePastors.com/start, we've got a free PDF download there that has some assessment tools, and then it's got over 50 ideas of potential side income, streams that we think any pastor could do. It just really depends on how you're wired and whether or not it's a good fit for you, but it'll kind of help you get started and answer maybe some of the what's next questions for you. So just start something like action. It's a lot easier to guide an object that's in motion versus one that's not. So get started, be encouraged, connect to some people in your life that will encourage you, celebrate you as you go down this path. And, if we can be of service to you, we'd be glad to do that. So that's my word of encouragement, Les.
That's
and
awesome.
Rich.
Well, I think about, we kind of started talking about our connection through Dan Miller, and he always talks about 3 things you need to be successful in business. He talks about having the right mindset. You guys definitely talked about that already today. The right idea, and you're talking about how you can connect people to that right now, and then the right network or community. You guys got all 3 going for you in the EntrePastors community, and so I appreciate you guys. And if others are wondering, where to go, how to start, I really encourage you to consider jumping in, joining me in the EntrePastors community, and taking advantage of what Les and John have put together, and more resources to come. And be great to hear more stories being shared. I mean, in your podcast, you're always sharing stories of pastors making their steps, but as new people come on board, it'd be great to hear more stories. And hopefully together we can help a lot of pastors weather this change that's coming to the church, and help the church get stronger, help the pastors and their families get stronger as well. So really appreciate and love you guys. Thanks so much for your time today and for being on the show. And again, check them out at EntrePastors.com/start, right? That's the place to go.
You bet. Thanks so much, Rich. It's been fun.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the interview with John and Les. I really love those guys and believe in what they're doing and what they're building over there at the EntrePastors community. Was this episode helpful for you? Please let me know. Also, I'd love for you to share other topics you think we should cover here on the More Than a Pastor show. And I'd love for you to join our private Facebook community as well. If you haven't already done that, you can find the links to all of those things over at morethanapastor.com/19 for episode 19. Hey, before we go, remember that you are more than a pastor. Saying yes to God's call doesn't mean you have to say yes to feeling stuck, broke, or unfulfilled in your life and ministry. Let's work together and help you create the life, impact, and income that you were made for.